Hello, my name is Mike and welcome to my love affair with showbiz. Now this is the second episode. The first episode I called my show My Love Affair with the Musicals because I really love musicals. My whole life has always been around music. But because of a future episode, I'm now changing the title. Already, only my second episode and I'm changing the title to My Love Affair with Showbiz. Reason being, at a later date, we have Joan Crawford, Mommy Dearest, Betty Davis, My Mother's Keeper. These were awful books written by the daughters of Joan Crawford and Betty Davis. And I have some inside knowledge that I'd love to talk about, but we're not going to talk about that this week. So, let's put Betty and Joan away. All right, we're going back to Judy Garland. All right, so we've already established that I have somewhere around 350 Judy Garland albums. But, I started with the albums, and I think I'm going to give a little biography of Judy. And let's see, so we get a little familiar with Judy. She was born in June 1922. It's really interesting because she died in 1969, and if she were alive today, she'd just be in her mid-90s, right? So she, in a sense, she still could be alive. Her father owned a movie theater, and this was back in the silent films, right, 1922, and her mother actually played the piano for the silent films. There is no recording of Judy's mother playing the piano, but rumor has it she was awful. But she played the piano, and she would perform, her husband would perform, Judy's father, and the two older daughter, and her name was Frances Gumm. Frances Ethel Gumm. How's that for a stage name? Not too good, huh? Okay, so she's 2.5 years old. She gets on stage. How she got on stage, I don't remember, but she started singing Jingle Bells, and everybody just loved it, and they clapped. So she kept singing Jingle Bells. Either her father or an aunt scooped her up from the stage because there was other things to see besides, baby Gumm singing Jingle Bells. Okay, that's 2.5 years old. Okay, so the two daughters were a singing group called the Gumm Sisters. It became quite obvious before Judy Garland was even 5 years old that she was the one with the charisma. And though her voice obviously was not the matured voice we know as Judy Garland, she could carry a tune and she had power in her voice. So Judy became the star of the Gumm Sisters. And Judy at 6 had already filmed 2 shorts, which you can see on YouTube. You see her with her 2 older sisters, and it's cute. It's just cute as hell. I mean, she's so young, she's singing, there's something to it. Okay, so the Gumm Sisters are playing vaudeville. Her mother was a true stage mother who performing meant more to her mother than the well-being of her children. That's a judgment call, but I'm certainly not the first person who has said that. Her mother was a frustrated actress, like most stage mothers and fathers are. They want to live through their kids, but sometimes the kids don't have the same dreams. Judy Garland was way too young to have any kind of dreams. She was born into showbiz. Very much like Sammy Davis Jr. too. They just started performing at an early age. Okay, so they're doing vaudeville. Okay, as the Gumm Sisters. How do you like that? The Gumm Sisters. G-U-M-M. Not very appetizing, right? The Gumm Sisters. So they're on the marquee with George Jessel, and it said the Glum Sisters. That's what the marquee said. Well, the Glum Sisters sounds worse than the Gumm Sisters. So George came back and spoke to the mother and the daughters and said, how about you call yourself the Garland Sisters? The garland. You think of a garland of flowers. It's a little more, accessible, right? The Garland Sisters. Okay, so then they became the Garland Sisters. Well, there was a very famous song at the time called Judy, and I believe Hoagy Carmichael wrote it. So Judy took it upon her, very young Judy, maybe she's 7 years old, decided that she's going to change her first name too, to Judy. So Judy became Judy Garland. And ironically, her whole family changed their last name to Garland. But it was Judy who was the Judy Garland. Okay, so they're doing vaudeville. Her mother had sent her to all the studios to audition. They didn't know what to do with her. Judy wasn't a cutie patootie like Shirley Temple was. She had the voice, but she was, well, you know, she really was cute as a button. Of course, all children are as cute as buttons, right? But they didn't sign her up until her mother was away. She got a call here. She's 12 years old, and her father was home, and he picked up the phone, and they said, "This is MGM calling. Can you bring your daughter in for an audition?" 12 years old. Wow. MGM. Now, MGM was the king, the queen of all movie studios, really until the 1950s. Okay, so she goes. For unknown reasons, she was like wearing like jeans and a t-shirt. Of course, they didn't wear jeans and she was in whatever the play clothes were then. Her father didn't think to dress her very nicely. All right, so she sings. Ida Coverman, who was Louis B. Mayer's assistant, saw her and was overwhelmed by Judy's voice. Now, at 12 years old, Judy Garland had the voice. You can always YouTube her, early Judy Garland at 12. You will be amazed at how she sounds at 12. She had it all. It's quite spectacular. Okay, so she passed it with flying colors, and then Ida called her boss, Louis, said, you have to hear this person. And he did. And they signed her. So here she's 12 years old, signs her career. Okay, now let's remember The Wizard of Oz. She was 17 years old. So what was she doing for those 5 years? Well, actually, she was learning her craft. She was in many movies. She started with the Andy Hardy movies. God, I think before The Wizard of Oz, she had already done 3 or 4 pictures with Mickey Rooney. So, you know, nobody quite knew what to do with her. She did a short called Every Sunday with Deanna Durbin, who was a nobody then. Isn't that a terrible phrase? They were a nobody. Well, of course they were people, but they weren't famous. Every Sunday, where it was jazz versus opera, where Deanna Durbin, who had a soprano voice, and of course Judy was an alto. One of the pictures before she did The Wizard of Oz was Everybody Sing, and Fanny Brice was in it, Alan Jones, and Billy Burke, who played Glinda, the Good Witch in The Wizard of Oz. Okay, so The Wizard of Oz. Arthur Freed, who was a songwriter at that time, wanted to produce movies, and the Freed unit, very famous production unit at MGM that did all of the best musicals. And when I say the best musicals, the best musicals, Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly, and Judy, and the movies were great. Again, that's for another episode. Okay, so Arthur Freed wanted Judy for the picture. He had seen her and thought, this is somebody who has talent that has been untapped. But MGM, because they knew The Wizard of Oz was turning out to be a very big production, they tried to get Shirley Temple. Now, of course, the joke is, can you imagine Shirley Temple singing Over the Rainbow? I mean, come on. Yeah, by you know, Shirley Temple at 14, 15, 16, she really lost her voice, and it didn't mature. But they wanted her, and basically 20th Century Fox would not loan her out. So they figured, all right, let's do Judy. Okay, so The Wizard of Oz comes out. Now, ironically, The Wizard of Oz did not make money in the first showing. It's since obviously made its money back a billion times over. But in the initial run, it didn't. But it made Judy Garland a star. To promote the film, her and Mickey Rooney went on tour, which many stars did in the beginning of the talkies, like throughout the 30s and maybe even the early 40s, where they would maybe sing a song, do a comedy routine, and then their movie would show. So it was like a stage show, which was very successful. Okay, well, The Wizard of Oz just catapulted her up to star status. Now, mind you, she's only 17 years old. Okay, so we all know The Wizard of Oz. I certainly don't have to talk about that much. But you think, well, she looks so young. Well, of course she is young. I mean, she started it when she was 16. But the drugs, as we know, Judy Garland's history of substance abuse is pretty phenomenal. like Elvis Presley. I mean, the drugs, unfortunately, the addictions they got into were humongous. When Judy was signed for at MGM, they wanted her to lose a little weight, which of course is tragic. This is an early teenager who wasn't fully developed, put on diet pills. Not good. Of course, what we know now about pills and pharmaceuticals, they didn't know back then. All right, so by 17, she was pretty much taking uppers and downers every day. Now, I can't prove it, but with all I've read, and you've seen all the books I have, and all I've done with Judy in my life, you know, my fascination with her, I get the impression she actually started on the drug regimen. It's 14 years old. 14. Not good. Her mother 100% supported the studio because nothing made Ethel happier than one of her daughters being a star. She basked in it. There's a picture of Judy putting her handprints and feet in Grauman's Chinese Theater, and her mother's there in a mink coat. Oh, she's just so happy to be in front of the camera. Okay, now Judy was on, right, the uppers to get through. You know, all of her movies were basically musicals, and you had to learn dances. Judy Garland was not a trained dancer, but you really wouldn't know it by the choreography she did. Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly both talk about that she wasn't a dancer, but you know, damned if you would think that. If you don't have a dance background, you would think, well, of course she was a dancer. She danced in all these pictures, and she danced, you know, major production numbers, not little, let's throw out our hand or give a little kick. You know, she is tap, tap, tapping away. After The Wizard of Oz, Judy and Mickey, and again, this was like their third or fourth film, did Babes in Arms, which was one of those Arthur Freed musicals. In fact, I believe Babes in Arms was the first full movie that Arthur Freed produced. And it is so entertaining. The number that's usually shown when they have documentaries on Judy or about musicals or show business is Good Morning. That's from Babes in Arms. Okay, so she's doing all her musicals throughout the 40s, doing the drugs, doing up to 3 movies a year. Now, that wasn't unheard of back then. It's funny now, right? Because our favorite stars, if we see them in 1 movie a year, we're happy. You know, the super duper stars, they don't, well, you know, we have Nicole, thank God we have Nicole Kidman and Meryl Streep because they're working actors. They do a few films a year, and it's nice. They have a great body of work. Okay, so Judy's doing her 3 movies a year, but these are major musicals, learning new songs, learning the dance numbers, and the acting, and she was above and beyond a great actor considering how musical she was. It's sad that as an adult she was too messed up to do movies, dramas, because she certainly had it. Okay, by the mid-40s she started missing rehearsals. She felt sick. Some were the headaches, some she just didn't sleep the night before, and Judy had this thing about her where she knew when she could perform before the camera, and she would not perform before the camera until she felt she was ready. Until, I think she said, I need to become Judy. You know, she knew what was expected of her, and sometimes it took days. Ironically, a lot of the films she was in came at a deficit. Like they didn't spend the whole budget because she was a very quick study. She could learn, and this is what Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire both talk about. She could hear a song or a routine once and she basically knew it. You know, it needed to be fine-tuned. But once she had the confidence, she would just do the number in a few takes. But the behavior was very erratic. By the time she got to The Pirate, I believe that was 1946, she had psychotic episodes where she would get paranoid. There was one scene where there was a fire and she thought they were trying to burn her, and she had like a breakdown. Actually, she had a few breakdowns in the 40s and supposedly 1 or 2 suicide attempts. They were always superficial, but it was a cry out for help. By the end of the 40s, she could not function anymore. She was actually fired from 3 films: Royal Wedding, which Jane Powell took over. Then the second was The Barclays of Broadway, which would have reteamed her with Fred Astaire. But the big movie that Judy could not finish was Annie Get Your Gun. Irving Berlin sold the rights to Annie Get Your Gun to MGM specifically to have Judy Garland star in. The soundtrack was recorded. Some scenes were filmed. Awful. The scenes are terrible. You can see this on YouTube. The direction is bad. She is not. It's just awful. There's no way it seemed possible for Judy to finish. Ironically, the soundtrack now is one of the biggest bootleg albums of all the bootleg albums of Judy, and there are many. And I have, of course, many. I probably have 20 of them. Maybe there's 10 different covers. Now, mind you, 10 different covers, to 10 albums, shouldn't even do the film. Okay, they had to fire her. They really had no choice, and that was when her first suicide attempt was recorded. She just locked herself in the bathroom, a very superficial cut to her throat. She was married to Vincent Minnelli at the time. Before that, she was married to David Rose for a very short time. Supposedly, she married him to get out of the house, her mother's house. But it didn't last. Vincent Minnelli, who is very intelligent in describing his marriage in his autobiography, that he wanted to help her, he wanted her to get off of the drugs, he was obviously aware of her vast talent, but it was kind of a losing battle. And they separated soon after. Okay, so she's 28 years old, and she's considered a has-been at 28. Oh, before we get over the movies, her last film was Summerstock. It was not a big production, she really could not handle those big, freed productions anymore. Summerstock was cute, it wasn't meant to be big, but Gene Kelly did it as a favor to Judy, because Gene Kelly's first film was For Me and My Gal, and he said, Judy basically taught me everything I know. Cameras, not to mug. He came from the theater, and you act larger in the theater. Kind of taught her about subtleties. And they also were a very good pair. Also did The Pirate, that film where she had a breakdown. All right, and Summerstock. Well, the movie probably should have been maybe 2 months. 6 months later, they're still doing it. She could hardly walk. She's a little heavier. They finish filming the picture, and she goes to a sanitarium to try to dry out, and she had lost a lot of weight. Well, they figured they needed one more musical number, and that's where she did the Get Happy number. Now, that's one of the iconic adult production numbers of Judy Garland. It seems like she's 10 years younger. She doesn't look at all like she did in the movie, but it's very famous. And the movie, it's ironically a very good movie, even though the music is charming, not famous songs, but very charming. Judy is hilarious in it. Judy was a very good comedian. She was very subtle, with her comedy, and of course she could dance. And some of the production numbers, one, the Portland Fancy, I could be saying that wrong, is just wonderful. I mean, she is dancing up a storm with Gene. Okay. Well, here she is, a has-been at 28. Well, here she meets who became her third husband, Sid Luft. And they started going out. And he's thinking, well, what? There's this talent here, a has-been. He couldn't quite figure it out. She goes to the London Palladium to do a concert. This is, I believe, in 1951. It was a major success. I mean, we all knew Judy could sing, so the idea of doing concerts, it seemed like a natural step, right? She could be a little overweight. Judy was healthiest when she was a little overweight. And she was. And she made fun of it. Obviously, the voice was actually not even 30 years old, so all the talent is still there. Okay, she comes back, and that was very successful. Sid had the idea of reopening the Palace Theater for Judy, to actually have a vaudeville show with Judy as the headline, entertainer, like she would do the second act. She opens in the Palace Theater. Major success. They gave her a special Tony Award for it. It was supposed to be, I forgot, something like 5 weeks. It went to 19. She did miss 3 shows, but all in all, she did it. Actually, it's funny that I have this right here, because this is a recording of Judy at the Palace that was filmed the last performance at the Palace. It's a bootleg. It's hideous. You really don't have an idea. You don't get a feel for it. It wasn't meant to be recorded for, for the public. Anyway, so here we have Judy. All right, so the Palace, major success. Well, so she marries Sid, and it was decided that now she would become a concert artist. By the end of the 50s, she had already performed at the Metropolitan Opera. God. And there was another very famous thing. But she was very heavy, and she needed to be hospitalized. Her liver was enlarged, and a lot of fluid was taken out of her body. She was hospitalized for a very long time. First, they thought she was going to die, and then they said she would be an invalid. And supposedly, when Judy heard that, she said, "Thank God, at last I don't have to perform again." Well, she may have said that, but Judy, like all entertainers who grew up entertaining, needed to perform. She needed it. She needed it financially too, because her finances were awful, which we'll talk about later on. So, of course, we're talking, 1959. This is before the Carnegie Hall concert. Obviously, she wasn't a semi-invalid. She had lost the weight, lost the bloatedness, and she started sounding really great. And of course, Judy at Carnegie Hall is the concert album of all concerts, not just Judy. I mean, she was never in better voice. Oh God, I hope I get these facts right. I believe it was 99 weeks on the charts, 13 weeks at #1. Mind you, this is a double concert album. It was unheard of. It still is unheard of. A double album being #1 for 13 weeks. And it won 5 Grammys. Okay, so she recorded for a film called Peppy at that time, The Faraway Part of Town. It's probably the most perfect studio recording of her. And if you're curious of Judy Garland singing a studio thing, she was always better in concert. She fed off of her audiences. It gave her the adrenaline she needed. And even at the very end, where her voice was a little gone, I'll tell you that the power she got from her audience and the power that she sent back to them is kind of phenomenal, considering she was so ill those last few years. Okay, so again, The Faraway Part of Town, if you're curious. She did one of John Cassavetes' early films called A Child Is Waiting. She was very nervous, wasn't good, not necessarily good direction for her. Burt Lancaster was in it. Maybe she was a little too old for the part. I wouldn't recommend it. She also did a musical called I Could Go On Singing. Unfortunately, at that time, and that was 1964, she was going through a divorce with Sid after many separations and custody battles. It wasn't pretty, and she's a little off. She had done a few specials for CBS, and they decided to sign her for a TV show. This is 1963, 1964, called The Judy Garland Show. Isn't that original? Okay, the shows are very inconsistent, and basically the show never was big in the ratings. James Aubrey, who was the head of CBS at the time, did not like Judy. Getting a show on the air with her was virtually impossible. Judy was highly sensitive. It was not easy working with her, but when you'd see the end result, it was all worth it. Some shows were fantastic, and most of the singing was live, so that's great. Also, it's great that she's singing all these new songs. You know, in her concert, she basically had her song she'd sing over and over again, and for us Judy fans, we loved it because all those songs mean so much to us. The medley of You Made Me Love You, For Me and My Gal, and the trolley song, it's just one. The last, I believe 6 shows were pure concert. She just sang, which are really special because seeing Judy sing, and again, obviously she's high. Judy never really got off the drugs. Then in 1967, she was divorced with Sid Luft, but he kind of rescued her and said, "Hey, why don't you go back to the Palace? You did well there. This is by 67, mind you, she died in 69. By 67, you never knew if she was going to show up for her concerts. Would she be on time? Would she be in good voice? Would she get sick and walk off? I mean, it was a macabre thing. People would go to the concerts wondering if she was even going to be there. Ironically, I happen to have the cover, Judy at the Palace. Okay, so it was a wonderful success. It was recorded. This is not a bootleg album. She's okay, but, her voice wasn't what it was, and she had her children in it. They're not talented, but Judy could not sustain a whole concert. She needed diversions. So not very good, but it's still a concert. Okay, so she would not get involved with her finances. The husband before Mickey, his name was Mark Herwin. He happened to be gay, but he was devoted. Judy had affairs with gay men. Obviously she has a very gay following. But they were very attentive to her. They did not use her. They really wanted to help her. They wanted to protect her. These people, I don't know what the family thought about all of these men coming in and out of her life. And Mark Herwin divorced her quite quickly after finding out that her money problems would be his because they were married, and he did not have the business sense to handle her finances. And again, she never did. So she's basically broke. All right, she was only married for a few months to Mickey. She died, the coroner ruled it an accidental overdose from all the drugs. By that time, she didn't have any weight problems at all. I mean, the weight problem was she was so thin. Her legs were so spindly. It was very sad, and she was gone. In fact, Sid Luft has a book, an autobiography that they kind of put together after his death. Said the last time he saw her, he couldn't figure out if Judy even recognized him. And he said that was just so sad. She was just so gone. Judy Garland made millions and millions and millions of dollars, but she died penniless. In fact, she was in debt, and her last home, Mickey Dean's, was her last husband. It's like in a London flat, like a one bedroom. I mean, this is Judy Garland, who lived in Holmby Hills, with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall as next door neighbors. Sad. But Judy refused to get involved with her business affairs, with her finances. All of her husbands took over her finances. And boyfriends. She just was not responsible that way. She complained a lot about being broke in her last years because she had really given her life to show business. She didn't know how to do a concert or a film half-assly. She didn't have it in her to do that. Even when her voice sucked, she has given her all. So you get the energy, which is interesting because it's funny, these say the last concert, I mean, these are a year apart, but there's a CD that came out with 3 concerts that were taped after these. And she's so spirited, but you have to be a Judy Garland fan to want to hear them, much less buy it. Now, the preceding years after her death, a lot was made of her lifestyle. The party Judy, the drug-addicted Judy, the failed concerts, the mass, the marriages, the sordid part of Judy. But this is the wonderful thing that has happened over the decades. That kind of got old. All right, we know her life was not easy, but she has all these movies. She has all these concerts. She has all these albums. Usually now, when Judy Garland is talked about, of course, she'll always be talked about with The Wizard of Oz, because that movie is not going away, maybe more than any other movie. They just talk about her talent. You will notice most famous singers mention Judy Garland as a role model, including, get a load of this, and I read it, I have it in writing, Aretha Franklin. Now, obviously Aretha didn't need to imitate anybody. She was a true original. But, as a kid, you listen, you watch, you take in, and then by the time your own talent, we're a little influenced by everything we know. So the wonderful thing now about Judy Garland is the reinvention of her history, where we're now into her talent. And of course, you can get all her movies on DVD. If you only know Judy from The Wizard of Oz and maybe A Star is Born, get some of the other movies from the 40s. You will be amazed at the talent she had. Doing imitation, singing, dancing, the acting, she could do it all. She was a triple threat. Okay, now I know we're going to come back to Judy because we're going to talk about A Star is Born, because that's kind of relevant today, and in the Judy Garland history, it's very important. So, I thank you so much, folks, for listening, and I'll see you next time.